Middle East. So Vanessa, let's welcome you to UK column. And I'm going to say, have you got any good news for the Middle East? I rather fear that the news is getting worse.
Yes, I mean, things are escalating. We were talking before I came on about the fact that here in Syria, particularly where we've been under an economic blockade that has basically stagnated society probably since 2018 until now, any kind of break in that stagnation is relatively welcome in a sense that it means things will eventually move forward despite the interim escalation, violence and pain. And of course, I also want to add, Brian, that immigration, yes, it's a problem, but when you mention the causes, of course, for me, the primary cause is our government's neo-colonialist agendas and foreign policy. In other words, the bombing and the pillaging of the global south, including West Asia, including Latin American countries, but particularly West Asia. So I think, we should probably talk about that a little bit more in extra. There's an awful lot going on in the region, so I've sort of tried to condense it as much as I can. So I'll sort of whiz through the facts, and I'm sure we can extrapolate a bit in extra. So last week we talked about the cause of the escalation, which is basically the double assassination of a Hezbollah senior commander, Ismail Haniyeh, who was the leader of the Hamas organization and also the chief negotiator with Israel over the release of the hostages in Gaza and any potential ceasefire. So that clearly shows how interested Israel is in bringing forth peace in Palestine. And then, of course, there was the US strike against the Iraqi PMF or PMU, the Popular Mobilization Forces, that actually comprise part of the Iraqi official military. Now, there has already been a degree of response from the resistance axis itself. Several US personnel were injured in the Iraq Ain al-Assad airbase attack, which, of course, you'll remember was also attacked after the assassination of Qasem Soleimani and Abu Mahdi Mohandes in 2020 under the Trump administration. At the same time, and again, this is part of the regional maneuvers, US troops have actually returned to Kirkuk in Iraq. On the next slide, please, Brian. For the first time since 2020, reports are saying that basically they're there to occupy the oil-rich area of Kirkuk under the pretext of fighting ISIS. And yet again, that hypocrisy is demonstrated by the next slide, where in reality, the Kurdish Contras, who are basically controlled by Israel and the United States in northeast Syria, and there they are, of course, occupying and trading Syrian resources, including Syrian oil, released ISIS fighters, which is nothing more than another US proxy in the region, and therefore Iraq is increasing its security on the Syrian-Iraqi border. CENTCOM chief Michael Kurilla is in Israel for preparations against Iran and Hezbollah retaliation. And of course, that has included the movement of ships and troop carriers into the region. And the following map is just one of many that I found on social media. I can't sort of vouch for its accuracy, but it does at least demonstrate the hardware that the United States is moving into the area, both into the Red Sea, into the Gulf of Oman, into the Mediterranean. And of course, the UK has its basis on Cyprus, from which has been ferried multiple weapons and also NATO troops into northern Lebanon under the pretext of being able to evacuate citizens in the case of war. I'll leave the audience to interpret that as they wish. A very recent interview by Judge Napolitano with Alistair Kirk, who's a former British diplomat who knows the region extremely well, worked in Israel, worked in the Middle East. Now, he makes the point that the US, while it denies any foreknowledge of the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, he makes the point that, however, the ships that are now in, for example, the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, that didn't happen overnight. This was planned, and according to him, from the time or even before Netanyahu went to the state. So let's just have a quick listen of what he has to say.
But again, it's telling. I mean, you can't just supply these ships to order. I mean, they must have been given their orders and prepared and ready sometime before Netanyahu gave his speech. All these positions in place, and the head of CENTCOM is now sitting in the Middle East trying to bring together, if you like, an alliance of Arab air forces that will help the Americans to shoot down Iranian missiles again.
There have also been concerted efforts, not only by sort of what I would describe as US emissaries, including Jordan, that made an unprecedented visit to Tehran to try and persuade the Iranians not to respond to the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. It's worth remembering, of course, that Jordan was responsible for the air defense for Israel in the previous Iranian retaliation after Israel bombed the embassy or the consulate in Damascus. And also worth noting that earlier this year, it had been discussed that NATO was to open an office in Jordan in its first official representation in the Middle East, which is another major move. And again, I just want to bring in Alistair Kirk, where he talks about the fact that Israel should deal with the situation on their own.
The G7 pleading with Iran, oh, look, you mustn't do anything, you've got to restrain yourself. They never turn around and say to Israel, you ought to restrain yourself. It's not Iran that provoked this. You did this double assassination precisely into provoking a response from Iran. So you ought to be sorting it out, not asking all the rest of the West and America to come and assist us and help you with what you did it. You made your bed, you should lie in it.
Totally agree, but of course Israel is incapable of defending itself without the help of the US and the UK and its regional allies. There have been a number of theories circulating about what the response from the resistance axis will be. This is just one of them, a calculated simultaneous strike on Israel. And if we have a quick look at the text of the article, which is in the Cradle on the next slide, please, Brian.
Okay. Here we are.
Thank you. So they're saying, sorry, there's a really annoying fly. Retaliation is all but certain and could happen within hours, according to senior US officials. I think this report came out a couple of days ago. And of course, part of the response is this psychological warfare, Israel not knowing when the attack will come in, the panic and confusion among the settlers in the occupied territories. So basically what they're saying, Hezbollah General Secretary Hassan Nasrallah has promised a painful yet calculated blow to Tel Aviv, and so on. So basically this report is saying that the retaliation will be a combined retaliation. Other reports are saying, no, it will be, if you like, a tiered retaliation. So again, let's just listen to what Alistair Kirk has to say about the preparation that Iran is making for the retaliation.
First of all, there's going to be no advance warning. Secondly, they're not going to be slow old drones. They're going to be high performance, smart missiles. And they're going to come from Iran. They're going to come from Hezbollah en masse. And they are going to come from the Houthis. And they are going to come from Iraq. I believe missiles have been moved have been prepositioned. This is why we've been in a sort of period of some delay.
And last night, Syed Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, gave an hour-long or a bit more speech. And he basically said our response will come regardless of the consequences. So in other words, what the resistance axis is now saying, they understand that the war will escalate with this retaliation, but they can't keep absorbing Israel's provocations. What is Israeli media saying to some degree? I think it's trying to be a little bit hopeful on this. So on the next slide, basically this was taken from, I think it's the Times of Israel. If we can just move forward to the next slide. Iran may rethink Israel attacks plans amid intense US diplomatic efforts. There were other reports also saying that increased US presence in the area is going to deter Iran. I think that's highly unlikely. There has also been a lot of social media chatter about apparently Russia supplying weapons in a steady flow to Iran. In the last few days, that's actually been denied by high-level people in Iran itself. But of course, there is a defense agreement between Russia and Iran, and that's been demonstrated by Shoigu's visit in the last few days. And this is actually part of the retaliation. Hamas has announced Yahya al-Sinwar, the new politburo chief, so to replace Ismail Haniyeh. Now, one of the reasons that Israel probably assassinated Ismail Haniyeh was that they wanted Khaled Mashal, who was formerly the external leader of Hamas, to replace him. Why? Because Khaled Mashal is, let's say, at least collaborative with the Zionist entity. And so therefore, the fact that actually Hamas has elected one of the more hardline leaders actually present with the military resistance factions in Gaza and probably at the top of the Israeli assassination list means basically that's sending a very strong message to Israel of the resistance unity, not only in Palestine, but also regionally.
Vanessa, what can we say? It's really terrible to listen. Your excellent reports, but it's really tough to listen to it because the violence is just escalating and escalating. I'm going to say to our audience, if the UK government under Keir Starmer, same under the Conservatives, can't call for peace in the Middle East or peace in Ukraine, I'm going to suggest it's very unlikely they are going to call for peace in this country because the fog of war and violence allows them to